only got one case in it. That's good. You don't have one. Oh, there she go.
Who are you?
Oh, Lord. Right here.
Right here.
Chair number 2. Ooh. Yeah, because they got the event.
Thank you.
Oh,
Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
I would like to call the meeting to order. It is 6:36, January 15th, North Miami's Board of Adjustment meeting. And would everyone please rise? And I think the flag is over here. And if our newest member would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. May we have a roll call, please?
Ms. Philippe,
Here.
Mr. McDermott, Ms. Arnold,
Here.
Ms. Cohen, Ms. Joseph.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank goodness. And would our attorney please make the announcement of the quasi judicial?
Thank you. Please be advised that the following items on the agenda are quasi-judicial in nature. The applicant or duly authorized agent for the applicant must be present. If no representative is present, the application would be tabled to the next Board of Adjustment meeting. When the petition is announced, the applicant or his or her agent shall approach the microphone and state his or her name and address for the record. Any interested party wishing to speak on any item may approach the podium after the board has opened the public hearing. Each party shall approach the microphone and state his or her name and address for the record, and shall address whether his or her comments to the board, Each party shall speak for not more than 3 minutes in order to provide for order and time for other interested parties to address their concerns or comments to the board.
Thank you. And with that said, anyone wishing to speak on this item tonight must take the oath, which would be administered by the attorney.
Okay, if you're appearing before the board, please stand, raise your right hand, and respond accordingly. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in this proceeding? I do. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Cook, any amendment to the agenda? No, ma'am. Okay, thank you. With that being said, may I have approval for the minutes of the October 16th? And I know it's been a long time.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Communications, do we have any communications? Anyone called you? Yes, Mr. McDermott.
Yes, I had several residents today, several residents in the neighborhood today call me opposing this project.
So duly noted. All right. With that being said, continued items, we have none. That's only this case, which we will move on with V-01-20, special exception, use pursuant to Article 4, Division 2, Section 4, and it is at the 13455 West Dixie Highway, and it's for a special exception for a funeral home. Okay, Mr. Cook, you're on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As stated by the Chair, this is an application for an exception and is also advertised a variance. And before I get into that, if I may take a moment, Madam Chair, to introduce my new colleague, Ms. Lorna, and she has been working with the city. She started when I started, actually, in August, around the 5th of last year or so. And 2018, times flies. And she started with the city as the zoning clerk, and because of opportunities within the city, my former colleague, Amanda Murphy, moved up to become a sustainability administrator, and that gave opportunity to Ms. Lorna to move into the position as the senior planning tech with the city, and we're welcome to have her. She has been an excellent resource with me, and if you have any words, Ms. Lorna, you're welcome to say anything at this point.
Good evening, everyone. I have no other words.
With that said, thank you. Happy New Year to everyone. I wish everybody a great New Year, prosperous, healthy for everyone. Thank you, members, for being here this evening. I'm sorry to hear about your loss, Madam Chair, with your uncle, and thank you for making time for us this evening, understanding your schedule that you had just come in just last night from trying to make those arrangements. With that said, as it was stated earlier, this is an exception to allow for a funeral home at 13455 West Dixie Highway. As also was indicated in the announcement of variance. I'm gonna get into that a little bit more, but based on the existing situation with the site, the variance is not necessary because it's already a non-conforming site. You already have the parking that would have triggered the variance that are existing there, and any increase in the non-conformity is nominal, and it doesn't have any great impact that we should have a variance based on any change to the site plan. That said, let's get into the procedures as it relates to the special exception. As we are aware, many of you are here, this is the third time that this item is before the board. Ms. Joseph at that time was not on the board, so I'm gonna give you a little more history if you behind it to make you more intrigued. It came before the board in 2018. At that time, in the first iteration of our review, it was decided to defer the item. When it was deferred with the intent to give the applicant opportunity to reach out to the community and make some adjustments to the plan, and to secure a off-site parking agreement to help facilitate any overflow parking that could happen because of any activities associated with a funeral. When the applicant came back to the meeting, we had a review, extensive conversation from the public and the board, and at that time, the board decided to vote in denial unanimously for the use. With that, the applicant made a petition to our office and to the Board of Appeals, which is the City Council, zoning boards of appeal, which is the City Council, to have this item heard. The applicant's attorney chose to go before the board, City Council, as an item to be brought up, not specifically for the appeal, to make a petition to the board, to the City Council. He made petition to the City Council. The City Council said that this is not a true appeal. The item, we defer it back to the BOA so you can make a decision on it. Thus brings us to this evening for an additional review on this item for the third time, so the board can make whatever you feel comfortable doing as it relates. That said, to get into the heart of the item, as you can see on the screen, you have here the property is located at 13455 West Dixie. The highlighted element is the property itself. You can see that slightly to the north of the property, you have 135th Street. To the right of the property, you have a residential multifamily development. And to the south and to the west, you have a combination of commercial and some residential to the southeast of the property. As stated here, here's another illustration of the site. This is as it's reflected as the zoning. As you can see, the zoning of the site is actually C1. C1 for this type of use requires a special exception. Thus is why we are before the board to allow the use through the special exception if you so choose to do so. As stated, to the right of the property or to the east, you have residential, which is highlighted in the yellow. And to the south and to the west of the property, you have C1, which is commercial. These are sites of the properties, pictures of the site property. This is looking from the west, looking east. This is looking from the south, looking north. This is looking from the northeast, looking south. And this is another picture from the northeast, looking south. And here we have is the site plan as the applicant has proposed. And this site plan is what was presented to you at the second meeting. At that meeting, we had much conversation as for the review that it was some inequities with this site plan and it wasn't sufficient because it brought about, if you look at the site plan to the, I would say, counter to the north-south on the site is northeast of the site. There's a parallel parking space, which has no access whatsoever. I don't know how you can get there, so that's not even legitimate. And we talked about certain circulation with it, with the backup. If you look at the property, it's the proposed parking spaces that are on the south side going towards the building, on the north side going towards the building. The way the circulation, especially on the south side and things that way, it was if the backup distance would be going right into the drive out, things to that effect. Some of these parking spaces are existing. The 4 that are closest to West District are existing parking spaces. The ones that are to the east on the site plan are proposed for the site. So we were saying that this wasn't aesthetic for the site, that it shouldn't be allowed, and we didn't believe it should. So that was our decision last time on this matter, and we thought it was some deficiencies as it was proposed. So this is the site as in all intents and purposes as it exists today. And it has 14 parking spaces. So this is important in this site. You have a non-conforming site. You have 4 egress and ingresses on the property. You have 1 to the south, 1 to the north, 1 and 2 on West Dixie. And then you have a triangle shape. So it's really, in all reality, is no way you can put parking on this site that it wouldn't be non-conforming. Non-conforming in this capacity. The code requires that any parking that you introduce needs to be at least 25 feet from the edge of curb or any ingress and egress into the right-of-way. As you can see, you cannot achieve this on this site. If you did that, you end up with probably 4 parking spaces at the maximum to meet that requirement. You have an existing site as it is, so it's a non-conforming. But in mine, it has 14 parking spaces. As you can look, and count it by me when I went out there, you have that. There's some improvements that need to be done as it relates to restriping and things to that effect. But they are there. So you look at the floor plan. So you have certain criteria as it relates to the type of use that you have. You have the chapel parlor area. You have a parking per square footage related to that, which is 1 parking space for every 100 square feet. Then you have the office area. The office area has 1 parking space for every 300 square feet. So when you do the math based on what is the chapel area and the parlor area, plus what is required for the actual office area, you have a maximum of 13 parking spaces that is required at this site as it is. So in that mindset, they meet the parking plus 1. Understanding that, one of the conversations that we had in the last meeting was that we felt that even if you're meeting the parking, it's inadequate for the use. So one of the demands that you placed on the applicant is they needed to have an off-site parking agreement. At this point, they have provided that. They have an off-site parking agreement with Shiloh Community Church, which is south of the property, approximately 600 and some odd feet from the location. So you have two things going on. You have the parking that has already been met at the minimum requirement. We understanding because of the nature of the use that there's some issues that the community has expressed and you as a board expressed in your last meeting. So to address that, they have got off-site parking. The code as it is written, if it was required off-site parking to count towards the actual total to meet the parking, it would need to be within 600 feet of the property. This is not to meet the minimum requirement. This is to exceed it to help with the mitigation of any parking concerns. So it's 677 feet unofficially per our measurement. So with that in mind, we believe in the spirit of the code, it meets it because it is an excess parking, and it's also to help with this use that they are planning on proposing at the location to help prevent any kind of traffic problems and that. And I believe the applicant will go into great detail on how they will do their parking plan and how they will facilitate getting the people from the church parking lot up to their parking lot and back without bringing too much interference there. That's for them to discuss at length. I'm just telling you the basis of what they're doing to try to fulfill the obligation of mitigating traffic problems. So this is the aerial review that we have, and it shows in the yellow line, which maybe is not as distinguishable from the picture that shows the distance from the actual two parking lots that they will be utilizing to the actual site to be 677 feet approximately. So we have several items that I've somewhat addressed in my introduction and analysis, right, that you meet and we talk about in the that we consider in our review of the special exception. So is there a use listed that requires a special exception? As we know, yes, this use is needed through a special exception approval. Let me find my paperwork here if I may. So the second consideration that we talk about here is there are appropriate provisions and access facilities adequate for the estimated traffic from the public street. So another one of the issues that we talked about, we felt there was too many ingress and egress with the four. So they have closed off one, they are proposing to close off one of the egress, which is to the north of the property. And in doing so, that would give them opportunity to introduce more parking on the site that is that would help mitigate any kind of parking concern. As I discussed earlier, the site as they have proposed is inadequate, but what our intent is, because of the use and because of the redevelopment, it would need to go to the Development Review Committee. And in that environment is where we would approve the site plan and how our traffic engineer and have our other public works look at the site and give them suggestions on how to better improve it before we would approve the actual site plan. Introduce more landscaping, probably bring some landscaping to the east of the property to help give them more buffer as it relates to the community that's to the east, the multifamily, something in that capacity if it's possible. You know, it's a concrete jungle on this site, so it's pretty hard to introduce any more new landscaping. Something they may try to do to try to mitigate that buffer between the different uses on that end. So we would do that through the DRC process and help improve it. And during that DRC process, we would solidify the parking agreement, allow for the city attorney to review it and make sure that it's adequate before we would sign off on it and approve the Development Review Committee site plan. So third, are there adequate parking areas and off-street parking, loading, and things to that effect? So I've discussed that at length, what we have here. We understand that it's a concern, is to really reiterate that we have a use that demands parking. But as the code is in its raw form, they meet the required parking. Again, to reiterate, in their attempt to understand that it does generate more parking. They have facilitated agreement with an off-site parking area to allow them more parking.
Excuse me, you have to wait for public hearing.
So is there suitable landscaping, fencing along the site and stuff like that? So the site is what it is. They are introducing more landscaping along the front of the property. As you look at it on the northwest side of the property and on the southwest side of the property, where you have opportunity to introduce more landscaping. Anything else would allow for them to excavate the concrete and introduce landscaping, which is, you know, if that's something you feel that they need to do, then that's within your purview to request that of them. Is the proposed special exception reasonable in terms of logic, efficient, and economic extensions of the public services facilities such as public water, sewer, and things to that effect? So what we're talking about here is level of services. Do we have the level of services to adequately support this new use introduced there, such as in water, sewer, police, fire, to this? And you were saying that aspect is already existing site. It formerly functioned as a dry cleaner. This use would not bring about significantly more level of services demands from it, because you know you only have a certain amount of services going on and so many. We believe that it definitely adequately will have the services to absorb this use at this location. And will the proposed special exception constitute an appropriate use in the area and will not substantially injure or detract from the use of the surrounding properties or the character of the neighborhood? So, as we know, West-Dixie is a commercial corridor. It's one of our main corridors in the city. So that, you know, commercial uses are what we want on that street, to the point that when you have redevelopment on that site, we have overlays in it. One overlay is the neighborhood redevelopment overlay. The overlay in that city, in that location, is the planned corridor overlay. Both of them talks about want to introduce mixed-use development, high-intensity density, as it relates to residential and commercial use. What we're talking about is one use going in there. So, in reality, to give it just as a perspective, if one was to purchase it and wanted to develop it, if you wanted to go through the conditional use permitting process, you could put it potentially 90 units per acre on that. With it being in the PCD, you can go as high as 100 units per acre on there, plus a mixed-use component on the ground floor. So that's just to give you perspective on what the city intent and desire is on the West-Dixie corridor. So in that mindset, you would say, yes, this is the efficient and adequate use for that area, because it's something that you would say you would want. It brings about business to a certain extent. And the special exception is the opportunity to introduce, if you so choose, or conditions and stuff like that to help mitigate the impact if you see that is necessary to do so. With that said, with staff review, we felt that it would recommend approval of the matter with conditions. A, that a certificate of use be obtained through the city and a business tax receipt. That it needs to go to the Development Review Committee for review for the approval of the site plan and for any modifications they would do to the building itself, in such as design and to spruce it up. That would be reviewed by the Development Review Committee as well. That a parking license agreement would be reviewed by city staff and approved, and that they receive the approval from Miami-Dade for the embalming use that they're gonna have on the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
So, you wanna, excuse me.
Madam Chair, there's an additional condition that I've been discussing with staff that the board might consider imposing. Is it okay to read what I've drafted? Yeah. So the applicant shall return to the board in approximately 1 year to have staff and the board review the adequacy of the conditions of approval to address adverse impacts on the neighborhood, and to modify or impose new conditions as needed to mitigate such impacts, but not to consider revocation or suspension of the special exception approval. So if the board decides to go forward with the application, but there are issues that are unresolved, you know, unanticipated consequences of the approval, you would have another opportunity within a year to address those issues.
Just so I can get clarification from what you just said, does that mean that if for some reason we decide that there is adverse effects to that community a year later, does that mean we can now cease all business activities?
No.
That's what I'm wondering. So
no,
what's
it's
the
only
difference?
to impose new conditions that might
conditions.
address the specific impact. But
Okay.
if they've already made the investment
That's
to
what I was
improve the
wondering.
building, it would probably be somewhat unfair to
Yeah.
take away certificate of use and occupancy. But at least there would be some mitigation of the effects on the neighborhood.
And
So-
who would have the job at monitoring this? Because there was another similar business, and we voted on it a few years ago, and it's been in existence, and we've heard nothing, so,
Well, the way it's written, staff
okay.
has responsibility to review it, and they would bring it to the board for review as well.
Okay. All
May
right.
I, for a moment, if I may, how I have done this in the past in other cities is we actually have had them come in, actually have put them on the agenda, and at that point, if any issues up, we'll have a discussion about it.
Okay.
And then that would give you opportunity, if you so deem necessary, to impose additional conditions, or to say, we're fine with how it is, and you know,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. And with that being said, is the applicant, and I think he's been represented this evening by Mr. Wallen?
Sorry,
You're on.
let me move my way out. Would you like to put the list down?
Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm Frank Woland. I'm an attorney. My offices are at 12865 West Dixie Highway in North Miami. With me this evening is Mr. Joseph Pierre. Sir, if you would stand up. And his son, Thierby Pierre, is also here. And Mrs. Pierre is at home. She's not well. She's very fragile, and so she could not make it tonight. But this is a family business. And in addition, Andre Pierre is here. You all know him. He's here in support of the project. There are other people here in support of the project. I want to thank the members of the board for giving us another opportunity. We have given a lot of thought to the direction of the board and to the comments that have been made by the public. And we have made arrangements for off-site parking, which we believe is a game changer for this particular application. And I also have some insight that I think perhaps wasn't brought before the board previously, so that you will understand the use and how it we believe will work, you know, in real practice, because Mr. Pierre has been in this business. He has a lot of experience. So again, thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank Mr. Cook and his staff. He's given a lot of thought. His analysis is well thought out, and we appreciate that he's taken a great deal of time, many visits to the property, many discussions to try to make this as good as it can be. And we want to thank the people that are here tonight. Not everyone agrees with us. We understand that. And again, we're going to try to be sensitive to the community, keeping in mind that, you know, Mr. Pierre has come to our community. He's a part of the community. He invested his life savings in order to purchase this property, his and his wife's life savings. His daughter was a city employee at the time in the building department. His other daughter is a local real estate person. When he looked into purchasing this property to use it as a funeral home, they inquired to find out if it could be used as a funeral home. They learned that it was permitted as a special exception. In other words, if it meets certain standards, then it's something you could do. If the city council had intended that you shouldn't put a funeral home here, they would not have made it a use that is permitted. It would be, in the industrial district or wherever. The fact of the matter is, there's only one other funeral home in North Miami. It's across the street and about a block and a half down. So it's not like we're talking about a use that shouldn't be here unless you don't want them anywhere. We appreciate very much that the city council returned it to this board. I think the city council was sympathetic when we appeared before them in February. And I'd like to show you just some of the differences in what we've done to try to make it a little bit more workable, all right? And all of these drawings.
The mic.
Okay. All of the drawings are in your packet, so it may be easier to look down in your packet than it is to look at the drawings. But there are two parking plans. There is the existing parking plan, which is the plan to your left, which Mr. Cook also had up on the TVs. And that's what's existing there now. There are actually 4 ways to enter and exit the property now. 2 from Dixie Highway,
One from town.
1 from the south side of the property, and 1 from the north side of the property. So as it stands right now, it's got 1 more parking space than the standards require. Thank you, sir. So,
There we go.
so as it stands now, there are 14 spaces. And staff has confirmed, and this is the count. That's with ingress and egress, and the condominium building is right here on the other side of Northeast 10th Avenue, okay? So if, one of the things we can do to mitigate this against, in favor of the neighbors, we can close this ingress and egress. And if you do that, then it gives us more parking. It ups our parking to 20 spaces. The parking we have is sufficient, but we can make it better, and we can address staff's concern about the ingress and egress and the traffic flow. So that is something that, within the discretion of the board, we're willing to do. The other thing that we have done is we have made a parking arrangement with the Shalom Community Church, with Pastor Fanfan. Some of you know him. It's a wonderful church. They have a huge parking lot. Here's the church. Across the street is a parking lot that's literally half a block. Big, empty, paved parking area. The likelihood that we will need this or use it is extremely, extremely small. And if I can, I'd like to proffer, as opposed to, having Mr. Joseph come and testify in the interest of time, and tell you a little bit about how this business works and what we anticipate will happen if we are permitted to proceed with the special exception. Typically, there are 2, we anticipate there will be 2, at the most 3 funerals a week for this business. So in a typical funeral, as it's practiced in this community, there is a visitation, or you might call it a viewing, The actual, service, for most people, it's at whatever church that they worship at. But the funeral home handles the business end. They move the deceased about, and there's a viewing, and that's when people will come. Like typically on a weekday night, a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday night between 6 and 9 p.m. or 6 and 8 p.m., and you might have anywhere from 25 to 40 people on average. Then, also on Saturdays, you have the same issue, and usually the people will have it on Saturday evening between 6 and 9. So it might be Saturday morning between 10 and 12, but 80 or 90% of the time it will be once during the week and once on Saturday evening. If there is a large service, it's going to be in a church. We understand this is not a place to accommodate, and we're okay with this, the condition proposed by staff and proposed by your attorney. We can live with that because we anticipate that we're not going to have a situation where that's going on. And we anticipate that traffic is really not going to be a problem, but we want to be sensitive to everyone's concerns about it. This property meets all the standards. Staff's report, the information in front of you, is competent, substantial evidence that the property meets all the standards that the city code has in order to grant the special exception use. It has public services. We will improve the landscaping. It has sufficient parking. It is an appropriate use, and it's allowed. And when you look at the other uses, it was a dry cleaning establishment. It could be a convenience store. As staff indicated, it could be an apartment building with 35 rental apartments and retail uses on the first floor. This is a reasonable use, and frankly, I think it's an attractive piece of property. It's wide open. It's architecturally unique. I think probably at one time, many years ago, it was a gas station before Peter Taylor and John Haggerty opened the cleaners, and I guess I'm getting to my age. Anyway, I don't really have anything else to add. I'd be happy to answer questions. I'd be happy to let you, hear if you have any questions for Mr. Joseph or for Mr. Pierre. For Mr. Pierre, anyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Wolin.
Madam
Okay,
Chair,
yes.
Mr. Wolin, I think it would just be helpful to have your client confirm on the record that the way you described the operations is what would
Sure.
be.
Mr. Pierre, if you could take the microphone.
Okay. Good evening.
Yeah,
You-
you don't have to go into detail, but just
I'm
to
not going
confirm. Right.
Okay.
You've been sworn this evening,
Absolutely.
and you heard my proffer, my description of the circumstances under which you bought the property 2.5 years ago.
Everything is clear what you said.
It is accurate and correct,
Absolutely.
and you have heard the statements that I have made, which are really based on my discussions with you
That's right.
about how you anticipate your funeral home will operate, how many funerals you will have, how many people will be present. and
Yes, we
those issues.
discussed that.
They're
Yeah.
all accurate.
Yeah, all accurate.
Thank you.
Everything is said. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Okay, thank you. With that said, we will open public hearing. I know there are a lot of people wishing to speak, and we did say 3 minutes, but I don't want to limit anyone from coming. But in the interest of time, all that I'm saying, if someone else ahead of you said something that you were about to say the same thing, unless you're really dying to say it on record, you can allow them to speak. Okay? So, public hearing.
Good evening, everyone. Angel Troche Lopez, 13325 Northeast 10th Avenue. Angel Troche Lopez, 13325 Northeast 10th Avenue. This is becoming a nightmare for me as a resident. Though we appreciate entrepreneurship here in our neighborhood, a city without citizens willing to live, it's not a city. Multiple times we have expressed our concerns, and personally about the real estate value. Multiple times the defendant or the applicant, I should say, had representatives have said that it did not affect my real estate. Realtor.com affirmed that it's on the real estate, and one of the biggest, it's stating differently.
No, Mr. Woolen, you cannot.
So,
No, Mr. Woolen, it's okay. Mr. Woolen, I cannot. I'm sorry. I did not allow them to make comments when you were speaking, and I don't, or when Mr. Cook was having his say.
With your permission, I will reserve my objection.
Thank you.
So, next concern is about the parking. So we have an agreement with the church that I've seen, and especially on Saturdays, services, and especially funeral services that had like hundreds and hundreds of people where the parking actually goes out of that perimeter. So who takes precedence when the church has a big service going on and the funeral home needs the use of the parking? How will that be arranged? And especially when the people attending those funerals are going to be walking 2 blocks. Do you really think that the people are going to be walking 2 blocks? And especially, let's say, the summer. Another part, I remember the first hearing, they mentioned that the funeral services were going to be on the weekends, and I believe it's at 6 p.m. So probably if we can visit all agendas. So now it's an entire week again, and 6 to 9, as the attorney indicated. So are we switching the story depending on the scenario? I do have a lot of concerns, and as I begged you the first time, please do not do this to me, to my son, or to any of the neighbors. Thank you.
My name is Howard Albert.
I'm sorry, were you next?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, all right.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sabine Point du Jour. As a tax-paying citizen of North Miami who has lived at 925 Northwest 134th Street since 2002, the CEO of Nobin Solutions Services, LLC, a member of the St. James Catholic Church chapter of PACT, which is the People Acting for Our Community Together, and a former educator for the Miami-Dade County Public School Board, I decided to attend this meeting today in support of Reflections Funeral Home relocation to North Miami. The reason is simple. For my company, I currently act as a recruiter, and I find jobs for my job-seeking workforce clients. Reflections Funeral Home will generate jobs for North Miami. This is a no-brainer decision. We need jobs in North Miami. We need businesses to bring jobs to North Miami. Here is one doing so. The last I heard, dead people don't loiter. Yes, people come to sympathize and grieve in their own way, but dead people don't make a sound. So there's no noise issue here from the clients of Reflections Funeral Home. A funeral home has always been and historically and always will be a staple in every community. This is a baby boomer community of North Miami in particular, if you look at the demographic. If you're looking for a solution as a board, simply complete your annual data collection like you do for PACT. The board will find the highest level of economic effectiveness equals Reflections Funeral Home. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jim. Sir?
My name
You're
is
next.
Howard Albert. I own the recording studio directly to the south of this property, 13385 West Dixie Highway. I know this property very well. I think that there's been a lot of misconceptions about how many parking spaces they actually have. You should probably go see for yourself. There's going to be parking all over the swales, on my side of the street, around the corner. They're not going to walk 675 feet during the summer down Dixie Highway to get to this funeral home. So I don't think that parking in the church is going to be valid in any shape or form. But obviously, I don't think the residents that live in that area right around us are going to have a parking problem. I can see it coming. We also on Dixie Highway there, the traffic already is a problem. There's another funeral home, like you say, a block and a half down the street. I don't know how many funeral homes we need on that same street in a block and a half. I'm all for mixed use and all kinds of things, but I think it's the wrong use for that property. And if you go and look at the building itself, it really is, unless you tore that building down and rebuilt something else there, the way it's set up is not very conducive to a funeral home.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Good evening. My name is Jessica Machado. I live at 13325 Northeast 10th Avenue, right kitty corner to the proposed funeral home. So I appreciate that Mr. Pierre invested his life savings, but he did so on a property that was not explicitly permitted for funerals. He knew he would require a special permit. He knew that a lot of people come to funerals. And yes, the dead are quiet, but the people visiting them are not. And is the issue that we're having here is that we don't need a special exemption for another funeral home. Not only is there another one across the street, there are 10 of them within 3.5 miles of my house. 10. We do not need an 11th funeral home. North Miami is quickly becoming the city of nursing homes, funeral homes, cemeteries, storage facilities, and Dollar Tree stores. This proposed funeral home is in the Arts District, which was designed to promote arts and culture. That's what the sign says in the neighborhood. This funeral home will be directly behind the sign that says Welcome to North Miami. There's another Welcome to North Miami sign to the west of the city right in front of a strip club. What are we telling people? Yes, we need jobs, but we shouldn't be so desperate for jobs that we short-sight our thinking and our long-term planning for a community and what we're really looking for here in order to just put anyone in the position, especially when they need so many different exemptions, right? It is human nature. No one's gonna wanna walk 2 blocks in the middle of the heat. What are they gonna do? They're gonna look for parking on the swales. Then who's responsible for enforcing that parking? Are we gonna call the cops every weekend and every night that there's a funeral home because someone's parking on our swales or blocking our driveways? Right? This is going to become a logistical mess. We are hoping and praying that everyone will behave properly and do everything right. When instead we have regulations and we have rules in place to prevent these kinds of conflicts from happening. We already have a plan in place. It is a good plan. North Miami is changing. The pressure from Wynwood, the design district for Aventura, is pushing all of these people into North Miami. I came here because it was affordable and a good place for a teacher and an artist like me to come and live and make my home. And I have seen the positive changes along 125th Street and other parts of the city. Why should we go backwards? We don't have to. The jobs are coming. The city is changing. It is a younger city. It is not a city of baby boomers. And we are self-identifying and putting ourselves in a corner by letting everyone continue to think that we are a pass-through city. We must be proactive with our planning, and we must allow the space to develop the way we intended it to, not be making special exemptions for an 11th funeral home 3.5 miles. Thank you for your time.
I'm Allison Wiley. My address is 1065 Northeast 134th Street. First of all, I believe this hearing is being improperly held because the city failed to post a notice of public hearing at the site, notifying the public of this meeting as required. Second, as obviously stated, there is insufficient parking to handle a proposed funeral home at this location. Absolutely nothing has changed since the last time we had a hearing regarding this variance, and there's no requirement to enforce the additional parking that this church has provided. And as previously stated, no one's gonna walk 2 blocks in the heat, and there's nothing that would force them to have to do so. This will create a nightmare situation in which cars will spill into the street in front of our homes and crowd our residential parking every single time a funeral is held. Third, notwithstanding the utter ridiculousness of putting a funeral home directly adjacent to residential homes in our condominiums, you're also going to disturb the ability of our neighborhood children to traverse the area and walk to school, because this funeral home will be located on the same block and only feet away from North Miami High School and Middle School. This intersection is already a nightmare, and traffic on West Dixie Highway barely moves during rush hour. Stopping traffic for funeral processions and additional traffic would further push those drivers on West Dixie Highway into our residential streets and further endangering children that live on 134th Street and 10th Avenue that have to walk through that school area. Lastly, we don't need another funeral home in this area. I don't know where Mr. Wolin got his information that there's only one funeral home in North Miami, but that is absolutely a bold-faced lie that you can look up on Google. I could sit here and name for you all of the funeral homes, but as correctly stated, there are 14 within a 3.5-mile radius, and there are 6 on West Dixie Highway alone. It has also been previously stated by certain members of this board at a prior hearing that you all should not take into consideration what the impact of this funeral home will have on our property values. But I implore you to exercise a modicum of common sense and not allow a funeral home to be placed directly adjacent to residential homes. The pictures that you were provided are definitely inaccurate, because if there were no residential areas around this funeral home, none of us would be here. We wouldn't have received the notice that we had an interest in being here. So I would ask that you please look to the opposite side of the pictures that you were not provided, and there is a home on every corner other than the exact West Dixie Highway. Those are our homes, and we will be directly impacted. Thank you for your time.
Good evening. My name is Maggie Bolivar. I'm from Dixie Terrace Condo Association. The address is 13455 Northeastern Avenue. I would like to know how they counting. The last time there was 8 parking space. Now it's 14 in the same space. I don't know how they counting 14 right now. So the other things, they need to count in 2. How come they say they have only 1 funeral home when you have to see between the 134th Street to 150th Street, they have more the 4 funeral home. So they don't know how to counting. The other thing is, they want to think when they want to ride into her, people has to parking like two blocks or 1 block away from the funeral home and walking. They don't happen. I'm very sure they want. I'm close to the supposed funeral home. They want to parking in my place, so I don't want in my place be mess. We trying to rebuild my place to be nice and pretty. I don't want a funeral home in my place. I don't want in my people. I represent 36 units. They agree with us. We're against the funeral home. They don't want to see when they open the window, funeral home, and what happened in the nighttime, on the daytime, they want to make a lot of noise. We don't have a peace if they want to do that. Please, take a consideration, please, again.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Lurleen Smith. I'm a resident of Dixie Terrace Condominium, location 13455 Northeast 10th Avenue. The same address as the funeral home that's supposed to be there, which is Dixie Highway, and mine is 10th Avenue. So we are neighbors. He says there was a gas station at the dry cleaners years ago. That's not true. My residence where I lived for 32 years. I have not moved, and I've seen all the developments and everything that went on there. So no gas station was there. This place where the gas station was, is the vacant, is still there. That's number 1. Number 2, they have 8 parking spaces. I counted today. And I stayed in the laundry room of my building. I didn't have to come out and look and count this parking space. That's how close this place is. Now, all the people who are trying to give the okay to put this funeral home there. If they were living there, they would not accept this. They should look at the residents who live there, look at the houses, and see how close we are to this place. They would not allow anyone to put a funeral home if they were the residents of that place. And I don't want my property value to go any lower. It is already low, and I don't want it to go any lower. So there's so many things that was spoken which is untrue. No truth to a lot of things that was said. So I'm asking you to reconsider it and do not give a permit for a funeral home at this place. There's no parking there. When Dixie Terrace, when 10th Avenue and Dixie Highway was closed off by the city, no traffic could come from 10th Avenue straight across. When visitors that come to the building to visit or people who live there and need extra parking, we were towed away. I never been towed, but there were visitors that I have been towed away from that place. So now I don't see how that they would grant a permit to open that curved and to put parking space there. If that should happen, our building should be the first ones to get opportunity to get parking space there, not the funeral home. They comes after. So I'm asking you to reconsider.
Good evening. My name is
Good evening.
Consuelo Vargas, and Consuelo Vargas. Okay.
Put it up.
There you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay. I've been living in the building.
Address.
13455 Northeast 10th Avenue, Dixie Terrace. I've been there for almost 10 years. And my apartment is right facing, like, I'm supposed to be the funeral home, which I don't know if you guys remember me. I was here the first meeting that we had. And I don't want to sit on my balcony just to look up a funeral home. You know, I don't think that is correctly, you know, for a person to put a funeral home where we have like 6 other funeral homes in our neighborhood, especially like they will say about the traffic. Right now, there is a lot of traffic in West Dixie. Even when it's an accident or something in 135th and West Dixie, all the traffic goes around our avenue, 10th Avenue. So if you put a funeral home there on a weekend or during the week, especially me, I'm one of them, that I come late at home from work. I won't be able to come to my building because of all the traffic and the people. They don't come in and to park it like they all said. I've been counting that, and it's only 8 parking in that land. If for any other parking, it would be on the curve, or it would be on the street, or it would be on the houses facing the south part of that I assume a funeral home. So please, I'm begging, and like I said, I'm against to be a funeral home in that property. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Public hearing is now closed, and we will have board discussion, but I'm going to take a moment of privilege as chair and start my discussion. Yes, and public may not like me. I just came from a funeral. I flew in last night from New York. I went to bury my uncle. And for those of you who know New York, everything is mixed use. You have people living on top of funeral homes in those apartments. And those apartments now, most places, property value have skyrocketed. You can't buy places in New York City. Okay? I hear you. You've said your piece. Now I'm saying mine. Thank you. Okay? I hear the discussion with the parking, Mr. Cook and Mr. Pierre, Mr. Wolin. And I hear the comments about people are not willing to walk. And I get it. It may be, yeah, Florida, but I walked in the cold and I didn't like it, but I had to. But one of the things that I found with funerals too, and maybe Mr. Pierre didn't think about it when you made your arrangement with the church, is that you do not have to have the viewing in the funeral parlor. Most places, if you anticipate a large public for visitation, you can have it at the church, which saves the person costs, because I saved close to $900 by having the viewing for my uncle at his church, where I didn't have to pay a penny. So those are all kinds of things that you can work into it that will, how should I say it, alleviate and make things better. You know, that's, you know, and if Pastor Fanfan feels that, okay, well, I'm going to make it my, you know, that's an extra funds for my church, then you can have all your viewings there. I hear you, it's not because I don't care. No, I don't live around there. I know that. But I still live in the city of North Miami. And I have to look at what comes in front of me fairly based on what is presented. It says it is allowable with exceptions. That's why they are here. Two things that brings people here most of the times, and those are the two things that we can't get away from: childcare and funeral home. This probably is the first, but trust me, childcare we can't get away because people are always looking for childcare. And people die all the time. So I know the city at one time decided there were businesses that they felt that they were trying to limit, such as beauty parlors and barbershops and such, but the funeral home is not one. So I hear all of that, but, you know, to me, it's like, here is an opportunity for a business to come in. And I cannot, for the life of me, look at it and not look at both sides and see that, yes, you may not like to see a funeral home, but it is a permittable use, okay? And there are ways that we can make it better for everybody. Now, with that being said, I will give it my colleagues to talk all they want. I may be in the minority tonight, but go right ahead.
So I'm very conflicted because, like many of you, I am pro-business, I am pro-entrepreneurship, and with the other meeting, I was very pro the business being here because I think that based on the regulations or the, long day, based on what's allowed, this funeral has every right to be there. I think my concern, after hearing from the community residents and knowing how funerals go, my biggest concern, you all, is the parking. And I understand it's been allowed to, 14 spaces? But I think something you brought up, Madam Chair, and I don't want to keep having them go back and do more additions, is whether or not the viewing or whatever services can be contracted out. Once again, I don't want to add to the additional work they've done, because I know they've been coming before us for the last, year and a half. But I don't know if there's a way for that part to be a concern.
Contracted out, but I think it could be said that Mr. Pierre, when he meets with his prospective clients, they can decide how large. For example,
But that's at discretion. But that's at discretion, correct?
Recently, it is a discretion. For example,
Yeah.
former Councilman Despina's wife funeral was last weekend, and they knew from the get-go that it was going to be a large gathering. So that's why they chose to have it at her church. Okay.
Excuse me. Can I?
Go ahead.
All right.
Ms.
We
Cohen.
are now intervening in a person's business. We're telling them to have the viewing elsewhere
Yeah.
where they're collecting money for that viewing.
agree.
So it's ridiculous statement. Second of all, there's 100 seats in this piece of property, and you're telling me that it's not going to be filled? And where are 100 people going to park their cars? This is a ludicrous, fallacious, you know, the whole thing has been made up and tied up in ribbons to make it look good. This contract I read, this parking license agreement, it's at the sole discretion and subject to availability by the church. This is an illusory
That's mad.
contract.
Yeah.
This has no basis. And no way am I going to say that, yeah, it's agreeable.
That's
Because, listen, he just said he's going to have a funeral every single weekend, okay? Church is going to be held every single weekend, and where are they going to park when all the residents are at home at that point of time? We're not even talking about working hours. Then you're saying between 6 and 8 at night, and they're going to have a chapel service when everyone is again home? What, are we making stuff up to make it look good? It's being packaged, but it's packaged in fluff and nothing. If there's 8 or there's 14 parking spaces, I don't care if there's 20. You got 100 seats here. Even if 2 people come together, you need 50 spaces. And I don't care if they're gonna walk, and I don't care if it's cold, and I don't care if it's raining, but the fact is, you cannot presuppose that someone's gonna do the right thing. It's not gonna happen. And you walked in New York because you had no choice, because they don't have parking in New York. I mean, this is ridiculous. To sit here and hear this for the 3rd time and get it, you know, packaged in a different ribbon and say, oh, great, now we could do this? It's crazy. You have 14 spaces, and how many people are going to use it that's going to be working there? How many people are going to take those spaces? So there's no spaces. So I'm looking at this, and you got 100-seat chapel. I'm going to tell him not to make money, to go ahead and have a viewing in the church. They're going to push it. That's their job. That's what they're doing. And if a person buys a piece of property, it's at risk, at their own risk. Person has the money to pop down in order to buy this. You know what? Some people make bad decisions. It happens every day. So, no. And to hear what, you know, about funerals and stuff, come on, 2 blocks away, weekends, this is an art district. We're trying to change this area. We're trying to make 125th Street some reason to come there. This is not a commercial business. This is a as-it-need business. This doesn't hire anyone. What, the funeral cars? What, the attendant? What, the person in the office? Are you telling me that this is going to bring in business? It's going to bring in the dead. That's what it's going to bring in.
Which is a business.
That's
Mr.
all I have to
McDermott.
say. Hold on, McDermott.
Oh, okay.
It's you, Vice Chair.
It's you.
Virgo.
Okay. I have a couple questions. So from what I'm seeing, you're going to be embalming the bodies there on site?
Yeah, and the chemicals.
We will have the capacity to do that, yes, and that's what they do typically in funeral homes. And it's licensed
Okay.
by the county and licensed by the state. And there are very strict regulations to make sure that it's done in a proper and correct and sanitary way.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Mr. Joseph, do you have all the red bag relationships and contracts and all that kind of thing?
Well, everything approved by Durham. This is Durham concern, not,
Okay.
it's already there in the city.
Okay. Pardon?
It's already there in the city.
In other words, it's licensed
Yeah.
by Durham and strictly regulated by
Okay.
Durham,
I
not by the
noticed-
city of North
I noticed
Miami.
I
So
noticed
one of the conditions is a certificate of use from the county.
Right. I notice on one part it says embalming room, and then the other thing it says storage. So I guess it's sort of like a multi-use room.
It's gonna be a bombing
There will be an embalming room.
Okay, because in one of the plans it says storage, so I assume.
Yes, that's not accurate, and there will be an embalming room. Obviously, there might be storage there, but, you know,
Okay.
and frankly, when I have an opportunity for rebuttal, I will try to address some of the other things
Okay.
that we've heard.
All right, one of the other things too, Mr. Joseph, is security. You know, one of you know, assuming that the people will walk, you know, assuming it's not raining and et cetera, and people are gonna walk back and forth between the home and the parking lot at Shalom, are you gonna have security in place to make sure that these people can transverse securely between the home and the parking lot? Because
Absolutely.
I will,
I'm gonna have a couple of attendants to work there.
I will answer that
Okay.
in two regards.
Okay.
First of all, we have agreed that we will have at least 2 attendants for, you know, any funeral where there's the need for that. We will have it, and they will attend to the parking, direct cars as needed, keep people from parking inappropriately. We will also have a van in order to transport people when we have the opportunity and the need arises from the parking lot at the church to the funeral home.
Right.
Okay, so it's not like everyone's gonna have to walk in the street, and it's just not the way it's really gonna
Okay.
work.
Well, and assuming that, you know, there is, and I only live a few blocks from the Shalom Church, and I've been by there on Saturday and Sundays, and it is overflowing. So do you have a backup plan, backup parking lot, where people can go and, because it's so isolated from any real parking areas, are you going to use the lot across the street, and do you have a relationship with them, or what?
We have had discussions with any number of the neighbors, and some of them have informally told us they have no problem, especially if they're not using the space. So for example, you have across the street, you have St. La, you have, you know, empty, you have a lot of parking in the area that is available, and certainly if we need it, that's why we will have attendants to direct people and to keep people from parking
Do
inappropriately.
you have anything contractually with these other people?
No, and I understand why, you know, people are reluctant to enter into a lease, and I understand, you know, why people, they don't wanna, you know, they don't wanna make a commitment and then find that they're in a situation that they don't wanna be in. We've found what we consider to be a very good place. The actual, you know, visitations, when most of them are gonna be in the evening between 6 and 8 and 6 and 9, when the businesses on West Dixie are closed. Yeah, I'm sorry, the condominium's open because that's a 24-hour situation. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, the recording studio, he's got a boat parked in his parking lot and it's empty. Okay.
All right, guys.
Okay.
And Mr. Willen,
wait-
please
wait a minute.
do not,
I have-
I
okay,
understand.
it's not needed.
Yes, ma'am.
I have another question. Go ahead. Okay. Our counsel for the board made a suggestion as to a condition early on. Is that something that the client is willing to accept as a
The
condition?
applicant is willing to accept the condition. We have no problem with having parking reviewed, and we intend to be a good neighbor, and we're happy to provide, you know, Mr. Pierre's business card and cell phone number to anyone who's here or anyone else. But let's understand, the ingress and egress to, for example, the condominium next door, there's only ingress and egress there from 135th. There's no way into their parking area from 10th Avenue. So the reality is that it's not going to interfere with their parking unless they want to be parking in the cul-de-sac, which, which is the street that was closed. Fine, then it's a tow-away zone and they won't be there. That's okay. We don't plan to park there. We are going to observe the law, and when somebody sees someone parked on the sidewalk in their driveway, whatever, it's a quick call to the police, and they come and they start writing the tickets.
Excuse
But
me,
it's not gonna
ladies
happen.
and gentlemen, there really shouldn't be comment while other people are speaking. You were respected
you.
when you spoke. Let's have a little bit of respect for the speaker.
How can we be
Ms.
sure?
Jo- I'm sorry.
My
You
concern
waited.
is the parking, because I understand the residents, and at the same time, I understand that he has a business that he must run.
Ma'am, first of all, just so our record is clear, we do meet the city's standards for parking. However, because we are sensitive to that issue, we have gone to the expense, and we've arranged for off-site parking. It is suitable parking. We have committed to having attendants outside in the lot to make sure that people's cars are handled. I've indicated to you, based, actually, Mr. Pierre has indicated, based on his experience of many years in the business, we're talking about 25 to 45 people at your average attendant. And I agree with Ms. Philippe, which is that, and I indicated that most people who are members of a church, they want to go out at their church, and that's where they have their viewing, and that's where they have their service and their sermon. And to address something that Ms. Cohen said, and I apologize because I should have addressed it or corrected it sooner, but I mean, the architect's drawing of the 100 seats in there, that's not what's going to be there, and I don't know who commissioned him or had him do that. I've spoken to Mr. Joseph Pierre, and he anticipates they'll have 50 seats, and that's what it's about. That's what this building really comfortably can accommodate.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I think it's important for the board to understand the standards by which this decision needs to be made.
I'm trying.
Okay. It's very often when an application is presented to a board that citizens come out and object. And the question is, first, what is the standard that the board has to apply, and how to evaluate what it is that the citizens are saying? So there's the appellate court that's oversees this jurisdiction is called the Third District Court of Appeal. And in the year 2000, there was a case, Jesus Fellowship versus Miami-Dade County, in which there was a church that filed an application to allow a private school. And many citizens came out in opposition to it, and the county commission responded by reducing the number of students that would be allowed from like 550 to, let's say 150. It was actually 524 to 150 students. And the court set the standard by which special exceptions should be reviewed. And I'd like to read the couple of sentences to you. An applicant seeking special exceptions and unusual uses, which is not relevant here, need only demonstrate to the decision-making body that its proposal is consistent with the land use plan, that the uses are specifically authorized as special exceptions in the applicable zoning district, and that the requests meet with the applicable zoning code standards of review. If this is accomplished, then the application must be granted unless the opposition carries its burden, which is to demonstrate that the applicant's requests do not meet the standards and are in fact adverse to the public interest. So one of the things you need to understand about competent substantial evidence is that most citizen statements are opinion. That is not competent substantial evidence. Competent substantial evidence from a citizen has to be fact-based. So when they talk about the value of property, a citizen is not competent to talk about value of property unless they are like a real estate agent or some other professional in the real estate business. Similarly, with regard to traffic and parking, That is not something that citizens can typically testify to. What is competent substantial evidence before you are the recommendations of staff and the application and the code requirements. And all of those at this point, if you look at the competent substantial evidence standard, point to approval. I can read you what it says about, there's another court, also the 3rd District Court of Appeal. Citizen testimony in zoning matter is perfectly permissible and constitutes substantial competent evidence so long as it is fact-based. So it's up to you to review what has been said. I don't think the number of funeral homes in an area is relevant. This application stands on its own. If it was relevant, there would be a code standard that said you cannot have more than X funeral homes within 1,000 feet or 2,500 feet. And that's very common for liquor stores and other kinds of uses, not funeral homes in your code. The other thing, and I don't know if you remember from last time, if you look at the permitted uses in the C1 district, what's permitted not having to come before the board, there's a lot of uses that are more impactful to the neighborhood than a funeral home. And to tell you the truth, it really surprises me that there would be so much concern about a funeral home when they could do things, and I can go through the list if you want, but it's really vehicle service. They could put a garage, a mechanic's garage there, which would be much more impactful than a funeral home. A bar lounge is permitted without a public hearing. You know, people, in my understanding, people who, or my experience, people who go to funerals are not rowdy on the street, like people who are attending.
Why are we getting from the audience? Please. Everyone had their chance. Let the attorney finish, please.
Okay, so just going through the list of what would be permitted without a public hearing, a restaurant, a sports cafe, a brew pub, a banquet hall. Those are things that would generate much more of an impact on the neighborhood. The medical marijuana facility would be permitted without a public hearing. So you have to decide, but I'm trying to give you some perspective on what the law would permit and what the standards are for your review.
Can I make a
Thank
comment,
you.
though? Am I allowed to make a comment? I won't go off on a tangent, but this parking license agreement is illusory. It holds no water. You don't have, okay, that's going to be a requirement.
Right, but they're only responsible for required parking.
Right.
And according to staff, they satisfy required parking.
Yeah.
Madam Chair.
And hold on, and again, I have to go back, and I know we have to take each case separately. And I remember it was the issue when that other funeral home came, and we were all up in arms about the parking, but we've not had any issues, or at least one that has come to the city where, and then they themselves said that if there is, when they have a viewing that is a large gathering, that they will take it, and they have taken it to their larger sites. So, you know, I
Madam
get
Chair.
it.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. McDermott.
In listening to what the, to what our council has advised us as to the Third Court of Appeals and what is and what isn't, and listening to him talk about, you know, what could be there, and I understand that even if a liquor store wanted to be there, we would have to address parking issues and all that other kind of thing as well, and maybe you couldn't, even though maybe it's permitted, perhaps because of parking and other issues, it couldn't be there. But in listening to his advice with the Third Circuit and what he has advised us for discussion, I would like to make a motion to approve this applicant to, as long as we have that caveat or condition that they come back within a year for review of the impact of it on the community and the surrounding neighborhood, and perhaps maybe we're going to tell them they have to have a police officer or something to meet higher standards to make sure that the neighborhood is not affected. But it appears from what the attorney is telling us, and his advice, that, you know, and I think, as I say, I think that if they have to come back in a year, as to review of how it's impacting the neighborhood, and I know that Mr. Cook is very good at following up on things, and this is not going to drop off his radar somewhere. I think that that may be a way to address the legal issues as well as the impact on the neighborhood, so that so that they can move on with the business, and hopefully we can protect the neighborhood at the same time.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve with these conditions by Mr. McDermott. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you. We have a motion which has been seconded.
For
So,
discussion.
For discussion. Any more discussion?
I just want to say, for the record, after the council's explanation of our obligation and our responsibilities, I think that really put into hindsight, because I'm going to be honest with you, I'm very conflicted because of the resistance and the feelings of the community that is tugging at me. But I also understand that we have policies we have to follow. And after hearing your counsel, I have no more discussion but to vote.
I have just one statement to make. I'm an attorney. I could read opinions upon opinions and upon opinions that they conflict with each other. And it's always based upon the terms and the set of facts regarding that particular case when they come up with a decision. So you've picked a good case to make your case. But I would like to see what the other cases say.
Madam Chair, you in voting, forgive me, and my apologies, ma'am. I know we want to move forward. I just want to address something that Ms. Coyne stated as it relates to the agreement. I read the agreement.
Which one?
The parking agreement. And so I know what it says.
Okay.
That's why I had as a condition that it would have to be reviewed by the city attorney's office to bring before
Well,
we
it has
make
to have
approval.
a contract. This is not a contract.
Well, before, I understand what you're saying, and I
Okay.
can see
The
your
person
point.
has to give.
I can
Okay.
see your point,
All right.
but the purpose of our review is to make sure it has teeth and that it has some culpability on the parking arrangement and that it will fulfill the policy. And if it doesn't, then
It doesn't.
that's part of the review of the Development Review Committee and making sure that the site is fulfilling its need and to mitigate any impact that it would have with the neighborhood.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Cook.
Madam Chair.
With that, may we have a roll call, please?
There's a motion on the floor.
For approval.
For approval, made by Mr. McDermott and seconded by Ms. Joseph, to approve the funeral home with the conditions that a certificate of use and business tax receipt be obtained, that prior to the issuance of any building permits, that the applicant must obtain Development Review Committee approval. Prior to the issuance of the DRC approval, the parking license agreement must be reviewed and approved by applicable city staff pursuant to LDRs or the Land Development Regulations, Section 5-1401H1, and the Miami-Dade County permits for the use of embalming chemicals on site, or a letter from the county that no permits are required, shall be submitted to the Community Planning and Development Department before the issuance of certificates of occupancy. Also to include the condition that the applicant shall return to the board in approximately 1 year to have staff and the board review the adequacy of the conditions of approval to address adverse impacts on the neighborhood and to modify or impose new conditions as needed to mitigate such impacts, but not to consider revocation or suspension of the special exception approval. Ms. Philippe?
Yes.
Mr. McDermott,
Yes.
Miss Arnold,
Yes.
Miss Cohen,
No.
Miss Joseph.
Yes.
The vote is 4-1. The motion has passed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Olga.
Lorna, you're so efficient. Okay, continue. Excuse me, we're not done.
Oh, our bad.
We're arranging dinner over here.
Okay, old business,
Yeah.
old business.
No.
Let's move on. Mr. Cook, do we have old business?
Madam Chair, there is no old business.
Any new business?
No new business, Madam Chair.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
So move.
So moved.
Yes. All right,
Okay.
all in favor?
All in favor?
Aye. Let me tell my neighbor we're ready to go eat.
Thank you for your time.
All right.
Appreciate you coming.